Many of you know that we had our Joshua March yesterday.
Amen.
Amen. And I believe that there are some lessons that we can learn from Joshua. So the bulk of today's message will be from the book of Joshua. But I do want to read a couple of verses from the book of Deuteronomy, the 11th chapter.
You want to start there?
I'm starting at Deuteronomy, the 11th chapter. And I'll read verses 24 and 25. Deuteronomy 11, 24 and 25. And then we'll go to Joshua, the 5th chapter. When you have them, you can stand on your feet if you're able. Deuteronomy 11, 24 and 25. It says, "Every place whereon the soles of your feet shall tread shall be yours. From the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even unto the uttermost sea, shall your coast be. There shall no man be able to stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land that ye shall tread upon, as he hath said unto you." Now let's turn to Joshua, the 5th chapter. Now I'll begin reading at the 13th verse. "And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him, with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. And Joshua the son of Nun called the priests, and said unto them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said unto the people, Pass on, and compass the city, and let him that is armed pass on before the ark of the Lord. And it came to pass, when Joshua had spoken unto the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns passed on before the Lord, and blew with the trumpets. And the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. And the armed men went before the priests that blew with the trumpets, and the reward came after the ark, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And Joshua had commanded the people, saying, Ye shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth, until the day I bid you shout. Then shall ye shout. So the ark of the Lord compassed the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, And the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of the Lord went on continually, and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them. But the reward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on, and blowing with the trumpets. And the second day they compassed the city once. They returned into the camp, so they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that they rose early about the dawning of the day, and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Amen. Amen. You may take your seats. I just want to speak for a few minutes and give us the thought, the day the walls fell. The day the walls fell. 40 years before the march around Jericho, God delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of Egypt, out of the land of Egypt, and promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. He promised them a land that they didn't have to labor for, a city that they didn't have to build, and crops they didn't have to plant. All they had to do was to go and to possess it. We read in the 11th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy how God told them that every place that the soles of their feet shall tread shall be theirs. Their previous leader, Moses, sent 12 spies into the land of Canaan, and among those 12 was their current leader, Joshua. After Moses had sent those 12 spies, 10 came back with a bad report, and only 2 came back with a good report. Even though the situation seemed hopeless to the majority, only 2 saw it God's way. And Joshua was one of the 2 that saw otherwise. Joshua was confident in spite of what he saw. He was confident that they could possess the promised land, but he understood that in order to do so, they would need to overcome some obstacles. Jericho was a great walled city surrounded by 2 massive stone walls. The first wall, the outside wall, was 6 feet wide and 20 feet high. The second wall, the inside wall, was 12 feet wide and 30 feet high. In between the 2 walls, there was a 15-foot guarded walkway. But yet God had promised them the land. Joshua understood, because he was one who went in to spy out the land, he understood that they could possess the inherited land of promise. But before they possessed that inherited land, the walls had to fall.
Come on now.
Joshua finds himself in the scripture in the 5th chapter of the book of Joshua, where he faced the walls and he looked up and he saw a man that had a sword raised in his hand. Being the soldier that he was, Joshua wanted the man to identify himself as friend or foe. Understand that as the leader, Joshua wanted to confront anybody or anything that challenged him reaching his destination, whether it was a person or a wall.
That's right, come on now.
He was prepared for a confrontation. Joshua, if I could use my imagination, probably said to himself, if you're a friend, then you better explain to me why you're standing before me with your sword raised, why you're standing before me, in between me and my destiny, like you want to start something. If you're my friend, then you better let me know why you're in front of me with a weapon in your hand. But if you're my foe, then let's get ready to rumble.
Come on now.
We could learn a thing or 2 from Joshua concerning our destination. If you're on my side, then you better identify how you can help me get to where I'm going.
Well,
but if you're not, then you better get out of my way. Joshua was no stranger to opposition, but this experience was unlike any other experience that he had been trained for, and it was unlike any other experience that he had ever experienced before. In the 5th chapter of the book of Joshua, it tells us that this soldier that stood with sword drawn simply answered, no. In other words, this soldier, this captain of the Lord's host, said, I'm not your friend, and I'm not your foe.
Well,
if you're looking for me to help you reach your destination, then you're wrong. If you think I'm here to keep you out of your destination, then you're wrong.
well,
I'm neither here to help you nor hurt you. I'm simply here as captain of the Lord's army.
come on now.
Joshua understood that even though he had some obstacles and some challenges to face, whenever he was in the presence of the Lord, it was time to worship. Somebody needs to hear this again. Even when there's obstacles and challenges that you have to face, when you're in the presence of the Lord, it's time to worship.
That's right.
Amen.
See, it's through worship that you're enabled to hear what it is that God has to say.
That's right.
Many of us don't take time to hear what God has to say, and as a result, we spend time trying to climb walls that we don't have to climb, and we spend time fighting people that we don't have to fight. It was through this worship that Joshua was able to find what the Lord had to speak specifically to him. How many of you realize that God has something that he wants to speak specifically to you? Through worship, Joshua was reminded of the covenant that God had spoken years ago. At first glance, it might seem that God had approached Joshua in the same manner that he did with Moses some 40 years ago on the backside of the desert. Because for those of us that are familiar with the story, Moses found himself on the backside of the desert, and he found himself in front of a burning bush, and when he stopped to see why the bush was burning and not consumed, there was a voice that came out of the bush that called Moses, and when Moses said, "Here I am," the voice said, "Take your shoes from off your feet because you are standing on holy ground."
That's right.
Amen.
Perhaps this was said to Joshua to help him to remember how it all started. Because back on the backside of the desert, that's when God first went to Moses and told him that he was going to deliver the children of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt, and he would take them to a promised land. But if you do a thorough study of the culture of the times, you would find out that there was a little more to it than what meets the eye. Unlike what God said to Moses, take your shoes off your feet because you're standing on holy ground. In the 5th chapter of the book of Joshua, the captain of the Lord's host said something different unto Joshua. He said, "Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thy standest is holy." Understanding the culture of the time, we would find out that there are certain things that had significance to the Jewish people in that area. First of all, let me talk a bit about covenants. There were 4 different covenants that existed in the time of Joshua. The first covenant was the hand covenant. It was just like today's handshake. If you had a hand covenant, what that meant is you and I are going to enter into an agreement. And we're going to signify the agreement by shaking each other's hand.
That's right.
But that let them know that we shake hands. We two who shake hands are the only ones that can alter this covenant.
That's right.
You shake my hand, I shake your hand, and we agree on the terms. But if either of us want to come and renegotiate the terms, then we would come and discuss the terms, and we would renegotiate our contract, our covenant, based on what we agreed, and then we would shake hands. So the handshake covenant was a covenant that either party could break. Then there was the covenant of salt. Being travelers of that time, people needed salt to preserve their way through the desert. They would all have little bags of salt that they carried. So when the sun got too hot, they would put a little salt on their tongue to keep their bodies from dehydrating. And everybody who traveled in the desert carried a pouch of salt. And when they came into covenant, and they needed a little stronger covenant than a handshake, they would make what was called a salt covenant. And what they would do is they would agree to the terms of the covenant. And each would take a sprinkle of salt out of their pouch and sprinkle it into the bag of the other person.
Well,
I sprinkle my salt in your bag, and you sprinkle your salt into my bag. And we both understood that that covenant could not be broken unless we could pick out the salt that you put in your bag and the salt that I picked out of my bag. See, that was meant to be a lasting covenant. Though it was difficult to do, it was still possible. They use that to signify a covenant that's not easily broken.
come on now.
Then there's the most powerful covenant, the blood covenant. When an agreement was made, after they agreed on terms, they would take an animal and they would cut the animal in half. And the blood would flow as they cut the animal in half. And they would walk in between the animal and make the agreement. That's the blood covenant. That covenant is one that cannot be broken.
That's right.
That's where we get the term "till death do us part," because the only way you could be relieved of the terms of that covenant is through death. So we understand that there was a hand covenant. We understand that there was a salt covenant. And we understand that there was a blood covenant. But I said that there were 4 different types of covenant. The 4th covenant was the covenant of a shoe. Many of us are not familiar with the shoe covenant. But if you read in the book of Ruth around the 4th chapter, it uses a shoe covenant. Any Jewish person in this time understood that a shoe covenant was a covenant where one person had the authority to make and break the covenant and the other person had no authority whatsoever to do anything about the covenant. So therefore what they would do is they would loose their shoe and hand their shoe to the other person, meaning I understand that we're entering into this covenant and there's nothing that I can do to alter the covenant. You have the authority to change the covenant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a shoe simply so that you realize every time that you see my shoe, you're going to know that you have the authority to act out on that covenant. And every time I look down and see myself walking with one shoe on and one shoe off, I will realize that there's a covenant that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with you. Well, simply what was going on here is God was saying to Joshua, remember, I made a covenant to you long ago and it has nothing to do about what you say or what you're going to do. This covenant I made with you is something that you can't control. So you got to realize that it's all about me and it has nothing to do about you. I'm not your friend or your foe. I am your God. You better get down and worship because I'm about to do something. What Joshua heard when he came into the presence of the Lord, we can see in the 15th verse, he said, loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place you stand is holy. And Joshua did. So Joshua said that I'm remembering the covenant that you brought before me. And then it gets to the 6th chapter because it says that Jericho was straightly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out and none came in. Remember in the book of Deuteronomy, God said to the children of Israel that I'm going to give you a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to give you a place wherever your foot shall tread, you shall have for an inheritance, and I'm going to cause everybody in the nation to be afraid of you. Well, this is the covenant coming to pass. And the Lord said in the 2nd verse, he said to Joshua, see how I have given into thine hand Jericho and the king thereof and the mighty men of valor. We've got a problem. God said, see, I have given into your hand the land of Jericho. But here we have Joshua standing on the outside of the city with two massive stone walls in between him and his destiny. Joshua understood that it was a covenant of God. Joshua understood that God was going to do what God said he was going to do. But in order for Joshua to go and possess the land, the walls had to fall. So before we talk about the day the walls fell, we need to find out the steps that it took for Joshua to go through in order for the walls to fall. One, we have to be aware of the promise. Had Joshua not been aware of the promise, when Moses died, there would be no progression towards the promised land. How many people have died wandering in the wilderness simply because they never attempted to move forward?
My Lord.
Some of us here today could have been, should have been, would have been, but never was, simply because we were content where we are.
Come on now, preacher.
So first of all, we need to be aware of the promise. That's where Bible study comes in. See, so many people are wandering aimlessly to who knows where simply because they don't take the time to learn about the promise. But today is the day the walls shall fall. Number two, we have to come into the presence of the Lord. Apart from the presence of the Lord, we'll do a whole lot of unnecessary climbing. We'll do a whole lot of unnecessary fighting, but we won't enter into the promised land. Many of us, we do and say things with good intentions, but we never slow down enough to come into the presence of the Lord, and we wonder why we never get ahead. So after we find out about the promise, we need to find out how we can get into the presence of the Lord. And then that gets us to point 3. We need to worship. It's through our worship that we gain intimacy with God. In the presence of the Lord, had Joshua been in the presence of the Lord and he not started to worship, it's when he worshiped that he fell down and said, what is it that the Lord has to say to his servant? And then God gave Joshua the instruction on what he needed to do to enter into the promised land. Many of us miss getting into our blessing. Many of us miss getting into where we need to be simply because we don't have that intimacy with God, simply because we never come to the place of worship. We get into the presence of God. We come into the church house. We might listen to the songs that are singing songs of worship, but yet we never get into the mode of worship ourselves. But Joshua understood that he needed intimacy with God in order to get the direction that he needed. Fourth, Joshua needed to remember. How many of us forget the promises that God has for us? More specifically, what are the promises that God has given to you?
Amen.
Many times we don't know what we can have. We don't know what we do have simply because we haven't come to the point where we remember what it is that God has given to us. Some of us don't know, and some of us just don't remember.
My Lord.
But after you spend time with God, after you begin to worship God, after you hear from God, after God allows you to remember where you've been, after God allows you to remember what he's brought you through, after God allows you to remember what he has promised you, then there's a decision for you to make. Point 5, you have to be obedient. How many of us have gone through the wilderness, and because we were not obedient, we stayed in the wilderness?
That's right.
See, had Joshua not been obedient to the voice of the Lord, had Joshua marched around 6 days and said these walls are too big, then the children of Israel would have been in the wilderness for perhaps another 40 years. Had had Joshua not gone on the 7th day, and had he only gone and marched on the 7th day 6 times, he would have said that we're wasting our time. We're not getting anywhere. It's only through obedience that you can get to the promise. See, what God was setting up was for those men and those women to realize that it's not through any work of their own, because if they were thinking that they were going to have to fight a battle, then certainly they would have not wanted to walk around the city 7 times. If they thought that they were going to have to climb that 20-foot wall and then walk across that 15 feet of armed guards and then climb another 30-foot wall, then they would say, God, we can't march around the wall today. God, we need to do it this way. But God is saying that you need to be obedient. You need to realize that you can do it my way, and then you will get to where you need to be. But if you don't do it the way God says, if you don't do it how God says, if you don't use what God says to use, then perhaps you'll find yourself climbing and fighting and getting nowhere. So they went through the wilderness, and Joshua helped them to be obedient to the word of God. And it gets us to the 6th point. And the 6th point is simply to shout.
Shout.
The victory is in the shout. See, the obedience gets you to the point where you can be victorious. Somebody here has been waiting a long time to walk into their inheritance, the promised land. There's been a number of people who have had a negative report, but you've been holding on to the testimony of a few that told you you were well able to overcome. The problem is you've allowed the walls to remain that prevent you from reaching your destination. You might have a massive wall of bitterness or unforgiveness. You might have a massive wall of dishonesty or unfaithfulness. Your wall might be a massive stone wall of sin that so easily besets you. And every now and again you've tried to climb the wall to conquer it, but you found it too high and too wide. But I've come to tell you that you've been wasting all your time for so long if you've been trying to climb the wall. The only way for you to reach your destination is for the wall to fall. You've been marching long enough, and today is finally the day that you can shout, because today is the day the walls will fall. You better get your instrument of praise ready and make the right sound, because just like Joshua has been told, you've already been given the victory. You can't see it, but you already have it. The massive stone walls that have been set up as a stronghold to prevent you from reaching your destination have already been instructed and commanded by an omnipotent and all-powerful God, that when it hears the sound of the instrument resonating to a certain frequency, that it's got to do nothing but crumble and fall. See, you got to realize that every wall, every stronghold that's set up has a certain resonating frequency that it must it must crumble and fall, because it can't stand in a certain sound. Anybody who understands sonic frequencies? Have you ever seen how people with an opera voice can sing and hit a certain note that will shatter glass? There is nothing fancy about that. Every object there is has a certain resonating frequency inherently built in, that if you hit that frequency, it makes the structure weak.
Yes.
So what we understand through this scripture is that there was a stronghold. And I heard somebody say this morning on TV that a stronghold is simply something that the enemy has set up to keep you from reaching a destination. But what I never understood was that strongholds were not set up by courageous people. People who were courageous were those who would go out and conquer. Strongholds are set up by the fearful to keep those who are strong from coming in. See, the walls of Jericho were not because they wanted to conquer people. The people in Jericho wanted to conquer people. The reason they set those walls up was to keep everybody out that might wanted to conquer them. So therefore, what we learn from Joshua is that there is some people that's afraid, but even though they're afraid, and even though the enemy might have set up some strongholds to keep you out of the place that God has for you, there is a certain sound that you can make that will cause whatever that stronghold is to shatter in its place. And God is saying, you just be obedient to what I say because I've got it set up long before you walked into this area, long before you went into where you are, long before you came before that wall. I believe some 40 years ago when God spoke to Moses and said, every place that you have put your foot, I've given to you for an inheritance. I believe that at that same time, God went to that mighty stone wall of Jericho and said, I've given you a certain frequency that's inherent in your belly, that no matter what goes on, somebody might try to do this and somebody might try to do that, and you can stand strong all you want. But when you hear that certain sound, I don't care who brings the sound for. When you hear that sound, you better fall down. For 40 years, the people in the land were wandering in the wilderness. They were wondering how they were going to conquer the land. They were wondering what was going on. And when Moses sent the spies out, they came back and said that there were so many people in the land of Canaan. They had gone on the inside. They had made their way inside Jericho, and they moved on to the land of Canaan, and they saw the people on the inside, and they didn't realize that the people on the inside were afraid of them just as much as they were afraid of the people on the inside. We might say, well, how do you know the people were afraid? Well, first of all, God told Moses that he would set up some people that would be afraid of him. But then when Joshua got a little closer, some 40 years later, and Joshua sent 2 spies by the house of Rahab, Rahab told him, look, we heard about how God has parted the seas. We heard how God has done mighty works. We heard all the things, and we're afraid. We're terrified. That's why nobody can come in the city and nobody can go out of the city. That's why they shut things up, because they don't want to see you people. And if they hear that you're on your way, we're going to get afraid. So we know that God has delivered you into our hands. And Rahab was smart enough to know that she can't fight God. So she said that, I want you to do one thing for me. I'm going to take care of you if you can promise me that when you come and do what it is that God said you will do, that you won't let any harm come to me and my family. So God is saying that there's some people that's afraid of you, and there's some people that's going to look out for you simply because they know that God is on your side. So the people of Israel, at the command of Joshua, they marched around the walls on day 1, silently, and the walls stood strong. Day 2, they marched around the wall, silently. They were obedient to God, but yet the wall stood strong. They repeated this on day 3, 4, 5, and 6. And each of those days, the wall stood strong. Then it comes to the 7th day. They marched around the first time, and the wall stood strong. They marched around the second time, and the wall stood strong. They marched around the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th time, and the wall stood strong. And they marched around the 7th time. And it was on the 7th time around that the priests were instructed to blow the trumpet, to blow the ram's horn. On the 7th time around, the priests shall blow. And they made some noise. And it shall come to pass, when you make the long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, when they walked around 7 times, and when they made the sound with the ram's horn, the walls got weak. But according to the 5th verse, in the 6th chapter, it says, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and all the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. What we find out is that we can march all we want. We can blow the trumpet in Zion all we want. We can be obedient all we want. But there's a certain resonating sound that God has already commanded every stronghold around us. God has already commanded every stronghold in the city. God has already commanded that everything that seeks to keep you from where God has you to be, everything that wants to hold you back and to hold you down, everything that the enemy has set up to keep you away simply because he's fearful of what you will accomplish. Once you make that certain sound, the wall shall fall down flat. Well, I want to let you know that God has come by today to let you know that today is the day the wall fell. Today is the day you shall make that sound. Today is the day that the walls will come down and you shall walk straight ahead. See, you thought that you were going to have to climb the wall. You thought that you were going to have to fight a fight. You thought that you were wandering for a while and then you were going to have to go and send your armed forces in to conquer the land. But God is saying, once you hit that certain sound, once you shout for the victory, see, I've already given you that victory. I've given you the victory 40 years ago. It was you that was wandering in the wilderness. See, I gave you the victory when I told you can go forward. I told Moses when he came on the backside of the desert that he was going to bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and I was going to give them a land of flowing with milk and honey. And when I told Moses that, when Moses instructed the children of Israel, it was theirs for the taking. See, when Moses got that instruction, he sent the 12 spies, and the 12 spies could have gone in by themselves, and if they had enough sense to make the resonating sound that they needed to make, then the walls would have fell 40 years ago. But nevertheless, God has spoken it, and God has commanded that wall that it better move when it hears the sound. So now we have Joshua, who has moved on because Moses had died. Moses knew about the land. Moses had seen the land from a distance. Moses had sent people into the land. Moses knew that God had said the land would be theirs, but yet Moses wasn't around when the sound was made, so therefore Moses never stepped foot into the land. But Joshua was one who had been in the land before. Joshua knew what it was like to go into the land of Canaan. Joshua knew what it was like to get into the inner city walls. Joshua knew what it was like to have to deal with those people. Joshua knew what the fruit of the land was all about. Joshua knew that this was their inheritance, and Joshua knew that all he needed to do was to wait for the day the walls fell. And when the time came, Joshua began to look at the wall, and there he came into the presence of God. And when he came into the presence of God, at first he thought he needed to do battle, but God let him know, this ain't about you, this is all about me. I'm not your friend or your foe, I am your God. You need to get down and worship me, and after you worship me, you need to remember all the promises that I've made for you, to you, and all the things that I'm going to do for you. And after Joshua remembered that, God said, take off your shoes, because there's a covenant that you have nothing to do with. This covenant came forth long before you were born, and this covenant is going to go on long after you're gone, and there's nothing you can do, Joshua, to stop it, because if you don't want the people to go into the land that I have promised them, then the people shall still go. It's just you won't go with them, so you better loose the shoe off your foot and recognize, realize, and understand that I am the God that is able to bring this to pass. So all you got to do, you don't got to worry about fighting those people in the land. You don't have to worry about climbing the first wall, fighting yourself through 15 feet, and then climbing the second wall, and then going on and fighting whoever else. All you got to do after you praise and worship, all you have to do is be obedient to what I've told you, Joshua. All you got to do after you be obedient is to realize that when you get to the place that I've told you to go, you can shout for the victory, because when you shout, that's when the walls will fall. The problem is many of us have some walls that we're still looking up at simply because we haven't made the resonating sound that we need to make. Well, today is the day the wall will fall. Whatever it is, whatever stronghold is in your way, whatever it is that's keeping you from where God would have you to be, whatever it is that God has promised you, right now is the time for you to take your 30 seconds of praise and say, God, I'm going to make that sound. I don't know what the sound sounds like, but I'm
I'm going to make enough sound till that wall fall, because I'm not about to climb. I've been walking in the wilderness for 40 years, and I've been wandering around this city for 7 days, and I'm just about tired now. God, it's about time for me to walk into my inheritance. God, it's about time for me to get all that's coming for me. And the Bible says that that's the year, the last time that the manna came. If you would read the 5th chapter and the 6th chapter, you will find out that for 40 years God had been giving them the manna in the wilderness, but that's the day the manna stopped. You got to realize that God has given you manna to provide for you, but God is saying, I haven't always been planning to provide for you forever, because I've got something that's waiting for you where you don't have to worry about planting crops. The crops are waiting. And if you remember when the spies went in with Moses, they said that the crops were so big that it took a number of men just to carry the grapes. Those some big grapes. God got big plans for you. God got big blessings. But not only do you got some big grapes, you ain't even have to plant the big grapes. God is saying, if you would only get to the land that I told you, you would realize that I've got something greater for you. But you're standing there looking at the wall, and the wall is still in your way. Well, I commanded that wall a long time ago that when it hears the sound that you shall make out of your mouth, the sound wasn't in all the horns. The horns played their part, but the walls fell when they began to shout for the victory. God has already told you you got the victory, but you just haven't started shouting yet. Well, if you want your walls to fall, then you better start shouting. The wall didn't fall yet. The wall didn't fall yet. The wall didn't fall yet. You can get up and start marching around right now. You can get up and start marching right now. Because the wall is about to fall. Today is the day the wall shall fall. Today is the day the wall shall fall. You better tell your wall, whatever your wall might be, that today is the day. It cannot remain. It cannot reside. It cannot keep you away from your destiny. It cannot stop what God has for you. It cannot prevent you from entering into your promised land. It cannot stop you from eating the fruit of the land. It cannot keep you wandering in the desert, because there has been a covenant that you can't do anything about. That covenant is all about the almighty, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful God. And God has said it must come to pass. So I'm going to take a few moments just to shout for my wall to fall. Shout unto the name of God. Shout unto him with the voice of triumph. Shout unto God. Shout unto God. Today is the day. Today is the day the wall has got to fall. Today is the day the community will change. Today is the day the strongholds are broken. Today is the day that people in this community will give their life to Christ. Today is the day that we will see the manifestation of the blessing of God. Today is the day where all of our wandering comes to an end. Today is the day where the manna will cease and we will eat of the fruit of the land. Today is the day that the wall will fall. So you better shout. an inheritance here on earth. It says in the 5th chapter, the 12th verse, and the manna ceased for the morrow, after they had eaten of the corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. This is the year that you shall eat of the land of Canaan. This is the year that you shall eat of the fruit and the honey, and the milk and the honey. This is the year that you shall see the spoils of the land. So the people shouted when the priest blew with the trumpet. And it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass with the edge of the sword. But Joshua said to the 2 men that had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house and bring out this the woman and all that she had, and you swore unto her. And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them out of the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire. The walls have fallen. And all that the enemy had is destroyed. Everything that the enemy built, everything that the enemy set up, everything that the enemy tried to put in between you and your destiny, everything that the enemy tried to set up to keep you out, everything that the enemy had laid in order, every weapon that the enemy had on the inside of the city, every army and every soldier that the enemy had defending the stronghold was burnt. It says they burned the city with fire and all that was therein, and only the city and the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. See, all those things that the enemy set up are now the property of the Lord. See, you thought that all this stuff was simply something that the world had set up, but God is saying it's his property, and now it's time for you to go and to take the city. But God has a little word for it, that it's not over yet. I have already given you the victory. You have been obedient for me. live in your inheritance. Now it's time for you to live in the land flowing with milk and honey. Now it's time for you to eat in that city that you didn't build with your own hands. Now it's time for you to eat of the crop that you didn't plant. Now it's time for you to inherit what I've given to you, what I've promised to you long, long ago. Today is the day that the walls fell down.